from David Pohl. We come to this time and this place to rediscover the wonderful gift of free religious community, to renew our faith in the holiness, goodness, and beauty of life, to reaffirm the way of the open mind and full heart, to rekindle the flame of memory and hope, and to reclaim the vision of an earth made fair with all its people one. Let's worship together. Stand, sit, whatever you need to do to sing this opening hymn. So welcome to the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge. My name is Nathan. I'm your senior minister. I'm pleased to welcome you here today. If you are visiting, whatever that means, here's the deal. We're offering a roots class that starts this Wednesday. This is sort of how we orient visitors to this church. And if you are interested, this is kind of your last, we're going to do another one, but not this one. So this is your last chance to sign up for this one. Remember, we are meeting online only, except for memorial services until the numbers go back down. So in the meantime, glad you're with us. Glad to be together. We also made an offering to the tech gods because last week our streaming computers were not happy with us. We think this offering will be gratefully accepted. One of the sacrifices we had to make last week was we had a number of testimonials from church members, and one of them just refused to play. So we're going to have it today. So we're going to hear from our own church member who grew up in this church, Abel Thompson.
Hey, what's up? How you doing? You know, that's a question that rarely gets an honest answer. You know, for me at least, I simply answer that question with a just fine or pretty good, no matter how or what's going on in the world around me. And I think most of us are socialized that way, not to burden other people with our problems. So, you know, how are you doing is usually just the formality that we perform in order to get to the real conversation. But for Nathan, how are you doing is the conversation. I remember he called me right after George Floyd was murdered. And he asked me, how are you doing? And I said, you know, I'm okay, you know, just working. And he said, no, Abel, how are you doing? And, you know, I was hurt. I was angry. I was confused, and I was scared. He gave me the opportunity to express those feelings at the following church service, and I chose to do it through poetry. And even though it was pre-recorded and shown over YouTube, I still felt the love and support come through the dozens of messages that were put in the chat. And then I received phone calls and text messages all that day after the service. And, you know, I still felt hurt and angry and confused and scared, but I didn't feel alone. I felt heard. I felt loved. And that's been the case for 30-something years for me. This community, this church community has allowed me to be young, allowed me to be creative and angry and at times lost. Throughout my life's journey, no matter whether I was coming to church or not, I've always felt the support from the community every step of the way. You know, my mom, whenever I go visit her, she'll call me, she'll say, you know, so-and-so from the church is asking about you. They asked how you were doing and said they were really proud of you. And, you know, my mom has a tendency to overshare and share all my business. So most of the time I'm a little embarrassed. But, you know, it really feels good to know that no matter what iteration my life takes, I have a community of people who truly care how I am doing. Have a wonderful Sunday, y'all.
Remember, this Saturday will be a service for Nancy Turkman. That'll be at 10 o'clock. We're going to do it in person, but the numbers are high, so if you don't feel safe, please stay home. We're going to stream it also. Today, we are placing one stone. We learned of the death of Jackie Blaney. Her sister, Flora Johnson, died in New York this week, so we're thinking of her. One of my favorite parts of this service, which for that month, it was so great to see you actually do this in person. So once again, I will take stones, place them in the chalice bowl in your absence. Please, if you're watching this live, type them into the chat. Invite those who wish now to come forward as we place stones. Your chalices at home, if you have them, I invite you to light them. And we say together, with hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love. When I graduated from college, I moved to Austin, and I could not find a job to save my life. It was right after the tech bubble boomed, one of the times. I knew I wanted to be a minister, but I had thought, I wasn't ready yet, so I had a list of other jobs I wanted to try. Teacher seemed like it might be a possibility. So one of my first jobs as an official college graduate was a substitute teacher. I quickly learned teacher was not for me. As I was subbing, I learned pretty quickly I wanted to lean towards middle and high school. Because I learned something about this. If you mess up in the first 5 minutes, you have lost the class. There's no theology in that. It's just the reality of subbing. I leaned towards the older grades because you never had a class more than an hour. So if I messed up, the most I would suffer was an hour, and then I got to begin again. Which leads us to the theme of today's service. Here we are again, shut down. The worship staff spent all day, not this past Friday, but the Friday before, brainstorming the entire worship calendar. We're trying to figure out exactly where we think you will be emotionally and spiritually on every Sunday. And because the cases are spiking, we're going to spend a few weeks worshiping online only. And so we threw a bunch of themes out to see what would fit. And then we landed on this one, beginning again in love. It came from a reading from our hymnal that you'll hear later, a litany from our hymnal you'll hear later in the service. But I'll start with the logistical reasons for it, and then we'll go deeper a little later. At the very simplest, we tried to have services in person. There were some of the things we did that worked, and there were some of the things we did that definitely did not work. I knew it because we saw it, and because you told us loudly and clearly, with a volume and a clarity that was frankly a little refreshing for this church, that you wanted things a little different and a little more in your worship. So we're using this new shutdown to figure out some changes to worship, and when we come back in person, we're going to begin again in love. And that's the point of today's service. What will you do or need to do to begin again in love? But first, the pastoral trauma reminder. This spike is not the other spikes. This shutdown is not the other shutdowns. This spike will not last, I'm still a little superstitious, will not last 15 months. I know it might feel scary to some of us, or frustrating, or exhausting, but this is not what was. We know things about this virus we didn't know when we shut down before. When I do premarital counseling with a couple where one or both had a significant relationship end before, especially if one or both of them are divorced coming into this marriage, I encourage the couple to pay attention to when they are in conflict. Are they in conflict with the person right in front of them? Or are they in conflict with the echoes of the conflicts of the past? In a lot of ways, we have to relearn how to cope with this virus anew. Beginning again in love is a good spiritual strategy. The shutdown is not what was. Most adults now have a level of protection and control, or here, I guess, at least access to a level of protection and control that we didn't have when we shut down before. We know somewhat which behaviors are safe and are not. We're not washing our groceries. We're not quarantining our mail. What we are going through is re-traumatizing, but it is not the original trauma. And now it is time for us to reset. It's a time for us to figure out how to exist with more love in our hearts. Do we need to be angry and worried in the same ways we were? Or are those echo feelings? Do we need to vilify the same people we vilified before? What behaviors and ideologies do we need to shed in order to begin again in love?
Before the world ended, fires engulfed Australia. Wombats burrowed to safety, letting other animals take shelter in their dens. All my life, I was taught faith was hope. What do wombats know of hope? They know how to stay alive. Sacred ashes whisper the names of generations who ushered each other underground to survive anyway, to love anyway, to build anyway. Hope is a footnote. Life is the goal. Whatever God you believe in wants first and foremost for all of us to live.
Truly, love will come to you.
invite you to a moment of prayer and reflection. The God that we know when we see justice and forgiveness be with us on this day. And hold all those who are sick right now. Help us to be a church of healing. Help us to do what we need to do to filter our frustration, our anger through lenses of love and compassion, our worry through lenses of love and compassion. Hold all of us who are worried, all of us who are weary, and please be in the hearts of our elected leaders, especially in the schools right now, and help them do the thing that will keep us safe and not make people sick. May we be beacons of hope. May people come to us to explore what is going on for them in their life. May we be humble. May we be kind. Amen.
Remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause,
we forgive ourselves and each other.
We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others,
we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone,
we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
Falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit,
we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For losing sight of our unity,
For losing sight of our unity,
for losing sight of our unity,
we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
for those and for so many acts both evident and subtle which have fueled the illusion of separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
we begin again in love.
We begin again in love.
I was hesitant to use that reading at first. This pandemic is not your fault. It's not mine. It's just a thing that exists that we have to make it through. There are things that we can do to make it better or make it worse, but this is not a result of some transgression that we must atone for. And somewhat contradictorily, Unitarian Universalists thrive on this idea that we are above reproach, that we are here to save other people and we don't sin and don't need saving. Well, sometimes we need to forgive ourselves and each other. So today, let's do that so we can begin again in love. Just a reminder that as soon as we have numbers below 20 cases per 100,000, we will begin opening again for in-person worship. There's nothing special about 20 cases per 100,000. The COVID safety team noticed that the last 3 times we hit 20, we were well on our way to a surge. Sure enough, here we are again. Just a quick reminder that the structures of this church, you, the congregation, are at the top. You elect a board. The board has appointed a team, the COVID safety team, whose job it is to study the virus and how to safely open the church. They make recommendations that are metrics and standards for opening. Your board then decides whether or not to adopt those recommendations. So this is not one person's decision. This is a very intentional process put about by this congregation. When we drop below 20 and it looks like the surge is well behind us, we reopen. We will keep all the same restrictions in place to start. As we get more comfortable with reopening, we'll start dropping some of those restrictions. As an aside, really quickly, you all did an amazing job of masking. I heard about all of these UU churches that reopened and as soon as they gathered, the masks dropped. We did it for a month, 5 weeks, and I saw no dropped masks, no chin straps, no nose poppers. For me as your minister who's primarily responsible for the spiritual well-being of this congregation, but also for me as a parent of 2 children who do not have access to the vaccine yet, it made me feel good. It made me feel safe. So thank you for that. Anyway, remember the staff wanted to get worship figured out first. And once we did that, we would start adding more and more things on. We were 1 week away from announcing that we would add on branches groups inside the church. Then our spike happened. So right now we are thinking about programming we can offer you once we reopen. This includes programming for children. We're thinking of doing things mostly outdoors and between services until the numbers are much lower, more people have access to the vaccines. Before you get too worried, remember, we're only a few months away from it actually feeling good to be outside. Summer will be over and we can be comfortable being outside. Also, when we're back, we're planning on offering a mix of in-person and online offerings. And pay attention to the cottage meetings from the second minister search and the strategic planning process. This is going to be in September and October, and I'm hoping the spike will be down by then so we can meet in person, but they will still be on Zoom otherwise. We need your help in casting a vision for this church. We need your help casting a vision for where this church is going. To put it another way, we are a growing and living faith. We need your input. We need your vision for the future of your church. And we need you thinking about how we can begin again in love. So I'm going to talk to the people who are watching this recorded. So those of you who are watching it live, great, you know you're going to give a lot. You always do. But for those of you who are watching this later, I don't know if you're doing dishes or hope you're not driving. I don't know, whatever it is you're doing. The offering is for you today as well. We are now in the month of August. We're going to share the offering. So anything you give us, unless you tell us specifically it is for your pledge, is getting split right in half. And half of it is going to Humanities Amped. It's one of the organizations in Baton Rouge that's doing some of the best stuff. The whole month, we're going to share our offering with Humanities Amped. Another thing about your building you should know, for those who came to the in-person services, you may have seen blue tarps on our roof. That's because the roof that has been damaged or been here for decades, we got a new roof. It is almost entirely done. If you listened really close on the video earlier, you could have heard them hammering right over my office when I recorded it. Your generosity did that. This church is set, especially with hurricane season. We won't have any this year. We are good to go. So, and I'll ask you to give very generously as this morning's offering is given, or because this is for the recorded people, this whatever day of the week and time that you're watching this offering is now given and received. Okay, so I picked a new background. You like it? So for some reason, Unitarian ministers love doing these in front of bookshelves. So I got all my books. Actually, this one's pretty good right here. So now, new background, new books. We're at a really unique point of beginning again in love. There are no rules for how to do this. There's no societal rules for when it is acceptable to ask for consent, taking off a mask, or asking if someone is vaccinated. So let's start intentionally with love at our core, being smart about how we craft these new cultural norms. So in this church, we will default to wearing a mask until everyone agrees they are comfortable, of course when the cases are lower, comfortable removing them. I think we as a church should always choose hospitality and defer to the member of the group who is the most cautious. That means if I am comfortable with my mask off, but someone else isn't, I joyfully and respectfully wear mine. When you are in a small group, don't try to force your unmasking on others. Listen deeply for discomfort in other people's voices to try and decide what is the most cautious comfort level. This is extra hard in Louisiana because many of the cultures down here do not do conflict well, and sometimes no can be packaged into polite agreement. We must be a church that does the hard work of being a good host and find out what people's true caution level is. This is a time for us to recommit ourselves to consent also. I cannot tell you the number of times these past few Sundays when we met in person where a handshake would normally be assumed have become these kind of awkward, clunky, almost handshakes until both of us make eye contact and make sure we're okay, or quickly shift to a fist bump or an elbow bump. Not everyone in this church wants a hug. This has always been true, but now it's more pronounced than ever. See if you can find a way, respectfully, to ask that isn't telling the person that they should want to hug, but genuinely searches for their comfort level. And the other thing, vaccines. So we'll start with the standard that vaccines make us safe. It is okay to ask someone if they have done a thing that will make you safe. It is awkward, it's not genteel, it's not what I'm used to, but it's important. We as a church need to practice asking questions about vaccination without shame, without judgment, without vitriol, but just with a loving hospitality that keeps them and us safe. I'd love to hear your ideas on this. What else do we need to do as a religious people in this new world to build a more consent-driven, more loving existence? Seriously, tell me. Not now because it's just a computer, but email me, call me. I really want to engage in this conversation so we can develop these new standards as Unitarian Universalists. The theological core of this is grounded in hospitality. We must make it so that other people feel safe being with us in our metaphorical house.
When the whole world has betrayed you, I will be your home. When you're far away, when you feel alone, when your world has betrayed, when your world has betrayed, when your world has betrayed, when you feel alone, when your world has betrayed, when your world has betrayed, when your world has betrayed, when you feel alone, when your world has betrayed, when your world has betrayed, when your world has betrayed, I will be your
So I've always known this great old universalist idea that none are saved until all are saved. Well, I say it's an old universalist saying. I can't find it anywhere. I like to go to the original source. So I asked a bunch of colleagues of its origins, and they said, well, I don't know, you're a universalist, right? Why don't you just claim it? So let's say that this church will be the one that says none are saved until all are saved. And I think it's a powerful piece of theology that is manifesting for all of us right now. COVID times are fascinating because our theologies are manifesting all around us, and it shows which theologies are life-giving and which theologies take life. And this is not a cheap shot at other faiths. Every faith has theologies that give life and take life, including ours. This church has long embraced a theology of putting the greater good over our own personal comfort, for example. This church has always seen the scientific and truth as important salvific parts of our faith. In other words, we've always thought doubt, knowledge, and reason don't diminish, but build our faith. And community and care for each other can be our salvation. But churches that are more God-centric or creed-centric can have life-giving theologies. If God is still revealed through people, maybe God's revelation and salvation is coming through the scientists and epidemiologists who have worked tirelessly for years to help us get out of this pandemic. And turning away from that work is actually turning away from God. Even though that isn't my theology per se, it is still life-giving. But the theologies that tell you you must look out for you and yours alone, those are literally killing us. Theologies that tell us to be skeptical of everything, to distrust all authority, not a wise critical mind, critical mind, but just this sort of blanket distrust. And the theologies that tell us that this life is wicked and all we need to do is wait until we get to the next life. These are the theologies that are not helping us to be saved from this pandemic. I've spent a long time being mad at my fellow Louisianians for avoiding the vaccine and the masks. I've been mad that we're willing to just give up and do things as if we did the work of distancing and masking and getting the vaccines without actually doing any of the work. I'm mad at the eye-rolling and general disregard at authority. I'm mad at our leaders for knowing what they have to do to keep us safe and intentionally passing laws, pursuing lawsuits that do the opposite. But I've been mad at Louisianians for this for much longer than just the pandemic. Let's face it, there is a lot of theology and ideology in my culture that has been hurting people for decades and centuries. Our desire to give up too quickly, to see something that we could do that would make all of us healthier, and to do the exact opposite, that is heartbreakingly woven into the culture and DNA. I've had an anger recently with this. I've read about nurses and doctors and people who work in the hospital who are treating patients now where many of these patients are unvaccinated or resistant to their treatment, or resistant to the idea that this vaccine exists at all, and how challenging it is for people who are already exhausted to sort of find these extra reserves of sympathy, and that most of the feelings are resentment and anger. So I'm noticing anger a lot recently. And I don't think the anger, unless we can filter it through the lens of love, is the most useful feeling. So here's what I'm asking us to do as a religious people. Don't get rid of your anger. Your anger is there for a reason. But filter it through that lens of love. Let's begin again in love. I've already made up my mind about who are the bad guys in this pandemic. I can't be mad at the virus, so I've decided to be mad at the people who refuse the interventions we needed. Other people have decided to be mad at masks or the rigid rules of engagement. But all of us are displacing our anger and our lack of control onto something we can be angry at and control. And that is not making us healthier. How many of you have heard members of this church, or Unitarian Universalists in general, saying that they joined this church to be around like-minded people? That's the part of our theology that I don't think is life-giving. That is individual absolution at the expense of universal salvation. It feels good for me to be mad at those who refuse the vaccine, at those who I decided aren't of like mind, those who espouse the racist, polluting, regressive worldviews. But if we're going to end this, first I have to acknowledge that my distancing is me trying to absolve myself, not trying to save anybody. But we've got to also find a way to filter these feelings through the lens of love. My anger and disgust, when done in an attempt to absolve myself, still makes everyone sick. When I begin again in love, however, when I engage with my people through the lens of universal salvation, understanding I cannot be saved until everyone is saved, that is when we start healing. I know this is hard. I know this is exhausting, but we have made it this far. We've made it this far together. We've awkwardly clunked through this thing, and we'll continue to do it. You know, I was thinking about the shutdown when I was driving into church today. Those of you who've been around this church for a long time probably have heard our minister emeritus bragging about how this church doesn't close down on a Sunday. Right before Hurricane Isaac, I remember him preaching and saying that even if we don't have a roof, we'll still have service here, and if it's safe, you should come. And I've been in so many UU churches that find flimsy excuses to cancel a Sunday service, that frankly it was refreshing to hear Steve so defiantly acknowledge that there was no tragedy, no trauma so great that we couldn't be together in church. So when we had to close down, it was even harder for me because I didn't want to ruin our streak of being open. Our promise that we would be here for you. And when the building was closed, I was so focused on the panic of shutdown and how hard it was to make good worship online that I totally missed something. Something that I didn't see until this morning for some reason. We never did shut down. We had every excuse to not do church that first Sunday, or the second, or the third of the shutdown. We had every reason to give up. You had every reason not to watch us clunk around on Zoom and then on YouTube and now on our own website. But you stuck with us. We worshiped together. We just did it in a way that wouldn't make anyone sick. And while we are shut down again, remember, it's just the building that's closed. And if we allow ourselves to use this time as a chance to reset, we can forgive ourselves. If we can forgive ourselves, if we can commit ourselves to the idea that whatever God you believe in wants first and foremost for all of us to live, then we have a holy obligation to not give up, to stay together, to talk to those friends and family that you might have found it too hard to have these conversations with. Call them up right after the service if you want. Say that in church we are beginning again in love and that my God doesn't want you to die. All right, maybe not that explicitly, but it's true. I do not want one more person to die from this stupid virus. Vaccinations and saving people from this crumbling theologies is how we can get out of this thing. We're going to get through it. Remember that none of us are saved until all are saved, so let's begin again in love. Amen. Let's sing. Wherever you are, stand, sit, sofa, chair, while you're jogging, however you consume this worship, sing this closing hymn. You may be sick about hearing about this pandemic in church. I'm sick of talking about it in church. But we're not done yet. For so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. Go love the hell out of this world this week. Amen. Go in peace.